surgery of the year. It's about the value of diversity in business. It's a special, once more, with the University of Bath School of Management. My name is Greg Ingham from Bath Life's publisher Mediaclash, and thank you for joining us today. Amidst the joys, the sheer joys of celebrating the very best of Bath with Bath Life in print, in person, and on social, we do also seek to address some of the more difficult topics, such as today, with the value of diversity. Think of it as the grit in the oyster, if you will, or maybe not. Or think of it as an area where some Bath businesses are falling short and missing out, as are individuals. If talent is evenly distributed, but our teams are not representative, then we are all missing out. Yeah, so today it's a stimulating session with the University of Bath School of Management, focused on that value of diversity, multiple ways, but starting with gender. Stimulation, information, and prompts to action await you today. We'll be speaking with Jane Ellis-Brush, Senior Lecturer at the School of Management, Abby Milliken, a board member of Bath Artist Studio, and Renee Jacobs, the founder of Be in Bath. Please do send your questions and thoughts using the Q&A button below. Do add your company name or educational institution to your question, or be anonymous if you'd prefer. And I think we may have had some already. Please note today's business surgery has been recorded on our Bath Life YouTube channel this afternoon. Firstly, some news from Bath Life. Into next year, our next business surgery with Bath Life, these are bespoke deep dive sessions showcasing companies and organisations' expertise and thinking through discussion. Yes, that next one, 12th of Jan at 2 p.m. I can't imagine you're going to log that right now, but we will, of course, be comsing this in due course, post-Christmas probably. This time on why sustainability, ethics and idealism matters and is mattering more, with Annie Snelson-Powell, a lecturer from the Uni at Bath School of Management, and Dave Kelly from Storm Consultancy. Please do talk to us about how you might be involved in these surgeries. They're covered editorially in Bath Life, of course, and also right now live on Twitter. And then, yes, that enduring value on Bath Life YouTube, a repository of insights, essentially. Meantime, also next year, the Bath Life Awards are returning on 23rd of March. We have a certain bias towards these, but I suppose I'll try and be dispassionate as I can and say that these are unrivaled, effective, and uber glamorous way to celebrate all that is best about Bath, including, of course, elements today with Education with the Uni. Current sponsors for the Bath Life Awards, and there's a roster, which is great. They are started by our headliner, Doubletree by Hilton, and then Savills, Stone King, True Speed, Bath Rugby, Novia, Bath Audi, HPH, Windsor Hill Mortgages, Hotel Indigo, Motorstrut, Minuteman, Apex City of Bath Hotel, Roban, Digital Samurai, Creative Bath, Entreconf, plus Juice, and also Triangle Networks. A variety, there are 1 or 2 slots still available, so please do talk to the team. You'll get a better flavour of what the awards are if you're less familiar with them by looking at our How to Benefit video. This is a webinar we ran, and you could see where it says scan me, it's a bit abrupt. You can scan that and go straight to see the video if you wish. We'll include that, of course, in our comms. It covers how to win, nominations and tips, but also commercial opportunities, as well as the key dates about nominations, grand reveal, reception and awards, all to follow next year. As is next year also, return of our highly successful property symposium, which is returning on April 21st. We're focusing this time on the city of the future, as well as, I suppose, the future of the city, new city thinking. What will be different about cities in 2030, 2040? What impacts now for planning, developers, architects? How has the pandemic accelerated or changed thinking? Much to cover. Please join us then. There'll be an in real life event, by the way. Previously, they've been virtual. More details of that early in the new year. Also in real life, and we'll come on to that one as well earlier in the new year, is Entreconf, which is our entrepreneurs conference. It continues to develop from conference to videos to intimate dinners with revelatory discussions. And I would just like to say the University of Bath School of Management has been a strong supporter of Entreconf and of new business thinking. There's a great sort of chiming in the way that perhaps the two organisations work and think together in that respect. As you see, the future is unwritten. Indeed, it is. Something else that's returning, of course, is the Bath Bool in June of next year. It's a perfect social business occasion, raises a ton of money for local charities, over 700,000, possibly nearly 800,000 to date. Please do talk to us about being involved and look out for the announcement in Jan with all the details. At the heart of what we do is, of course, Bath Life. And so I'd like to say two things. One, that we are really proud to publish a magazine that celebrates all the good stuff, technical term, in Bath, especially in this year, our 20th year. But secondly, thank you so much for your support throughout all these 20 years, but particularly, of course, the last 2 or 3, which have had 1 or 2 local challenges, I suppose, for us each in business. Right, let's do this. Let's formally introduce our speakers and ask them to come forward onto camera. Let's bring forward Jane, Abby, and Renee. Jane, as a quick good morning to you each, by the way. Hello. I'll give a little bio so that those watching will know who you are. Jane is Director of Teaching for MBA courses, as well as a Senior Lecturer in Supply Chain Management at the University of Bath's School of Management, Commercial Assessor for the Cabinet Office as well, additionally an Executive Coach, and also has set up a community interest company here in Bath, First Impressions, aiming to help underprivileged women back into work through support with clothes and interview techniques. By the way, we'll make sure there's a link to First Impressions in the social media now, but also in Bath Life in the coverage, which of course will be next year. Previously, in interesting context here, Jane had a 30-year career as a senior exec in a number of blue chip companies. Most recent experience as MD of Shared Services and Procurement across Europe, Middle East, Africa for a large financial institution. Additionally, holds a PhD from the University of Bath in commercial relationships. In other words, steeped in commercial world, commercial values, but also more sort of theoretical, stand-back, analytical work within the university. So absolutely delighted to have Jane involved. Abby, an arts marketeer and copywriter, good morning. Has been a trustee at Bath Artist Studio since 2019. Currently leads on marketing for Bristol Beacon's education and community programs. Previously managed comms for a development program based at Bristol Museum, supporting over 200 museums across the Southwest. And former alumnus, is that the technical term, of the University of Bath as well. Renee Jacobs, perhaps a familiar figure to some on the Bath circuit, founder of Be in Bath, an organisation which is passionate about supporting and empowering individuals from UK minority and low income backgrounds, as well as LGBTQ plus people in the workplace. Renee is an accomplished TEDx speaker, partner business manager at ARIA Networks, and non-exec TechSpark, apologies, not-for-profit tech community dedicated to connecting education and strengthening tech ecosystems from Swindon to Swansea. That's very euphemous, just as well they're both begin with SW. I suspect you go slightly west and slightly east of that, but there you go, SW to SW. There you go. To you each, welcome. Much together, and I really will be speaking much less. Jane, let's start with you, if I may, and let's talk about the principal area we're focusing on today, which is gender diversity, before we broaden it out into other areas. As a scene setter, how would you assess the progress to better diversity through businesses?
Thanks, Greg. It's great to be here this morning. I was reflecting on the fact I've had over 20 years experience on various boards, and when I started sitting on boards, I was usually the only female, and the challenge that presents when you're a lone voice. And I think things have changed in terms of things are quite a lot more overt now, and quite often we talk about trying to actually at least there's a conversation about the issues, but I don't really feel as though the dial has moved very far at all. I think there's still a challenge. I'm no longer on a board, but the people that I know that are on boards, there's still major challenges on there. We're still not hitting the numbers we should be. It goes up and down. Some years it's better than others, but it still hasn't moved the dial as much as perhaps when I was in my 30s thinking about board diversity, excited about the future and thinking one day it's going to be 50% and we'll all be sitting here not feeling out of place. So I don't think it's moved as far as it should be to start the debate off.
not moved as far as it should, but perhaps if some watching, it's a slight surprise for you to say that you don't think it's moved very much at all. Maybe it's one of the myths that we all cling to, that the long arc of justice trends towards some form of enlightenment. Most indices are moving in the right direction, but not far or fast enough. Is that
absolutely? It should be 50% clearly. Or very near that, and so it's still nowhere near that in most places. And I think women are still on the minority in a lot of very senior positions in organisations. So yes, in certain sectors you'll see women being the majority, but in most big multinational organisations you don't find that.
Do you think, and all of this is broad brush stuff, of course, and inherent as some gross generalisations, but do you think it is faster moving because of better awareness and profile issues in larger companies than in small to medium-sized companies?
Possibly. I mean, I think that in larger companies you have all the policies and procedures that try and make all this sort of potentially what's causing the issues, some of the biases, some of the discrimination, make it more overt. But if you're, I guess if you're a small company, sometimes it's harder to find the right people, but I still think that's probably just an excuse. I think ultimately maybe there isn't a burning platform to make people do this stuff. And I think I guess if I'm controversial about the vast majority of government and parliament, if they were all women or mostly women, maybe we'd start to see some changes. So I think when you see one of the biggest institutions in the UK not being representative either, then you again start to see some challenges.
Yeah, one of the biggest and clearly two things. One of the highest profile, but also in the best position to enact change and reflect change.
Absolutely.
One might carefully sidestep the issue of the royal family in that respect as well, given some of the prominence of certain comments in certain areas by certain people in certain days. Let's bring in Renee and Abby. Headline, start point, some progress, not enough. Do you concur?
Okay, I'll go. I think it's difficult not to agree with that. I think that you can see that we put in different quotas, and listed companies have to have a specific amount of representation on their boards, so companies that are listed on the stock exchange. But I think that actually it's difficult for organizations big and small to be able to implement what's required, and whether that is because they are not trying in the right ways, or because there is a genuine lack of people available, could be something to debate. But I think it's really evident that we're not we're not making the progress that we should be, and actually at the rate that we're going, it's going to be like 50 years before, another 50 years before we get to that 50-50 mark, which is ridiculous, really.
Not your phrase, but pace is glacial, or at any rate, it's bloody slow, I guess. Yeah. And Abby, from your point of view, let's move on to this area. What do you think, assuming you concur with the points so far, what do you think companies and organizations are missing by not being more gender aware?
I guess it's just having a more rounded outlook on making decisions in terms of not necessarily gender, but all types of people can help balance decisions, and having greater insight into strategy in whatever organization you're in. I think it really makes a difference, because if you just have one type of person, then I think you can just get stuck in one type of outlook.
Yeah, I mean, a form of monoculturalism of whatever type is ultimately limiting, I guess, in whichever form. So let's come on to this. So why, we can all posit this point that if talent is evenly distributed and there are benefits, why don't companies take action faster, further? What are the barriers?
I guess the one that I would that is, I guess, it's the elephant in the room really, is there's a structural issue, isn't there, which is, you know, women often have children, they drop out of the workforce for a period of time, which is entirely fine. And I think is actually getting them back into the workforce that, you know, quite a lot of women struggle with. They might get back in, but they certainly find themselves further down the pecking order than they were before. And so, you know, unless we come up with a society change in this stuff to enable women to, you know, to be counted for the time that they're away, because it's entirely fine for them to take as many years as they want out, but they still should be able to, you know, get those top level positions when they return. And I, you know, I know within my previous organizations, we had like keeping in touch days, and we had a way of trying to help them. And maybe technology will help in the future, but, you know, I think that's got to be a real significant issue. Once we've got over the barriers of, you know, other barriers, the discrimination barriers and all other things, then surely there's an issue around how do we get women returners back into the workplace and want to return into the workplace, into roles that they want to have. So that's probably, for me, that's one of the things that, you know, is going to take a long time, not a long time to fix, but take a monumental change to fix.
Childcare, which we'll specifically come on to, but the slightly more the general point about the impact of having kids, which is primarily, in some cases, almost exclusively felt by women, and thereby how companies react. What else do you buy the argument that this reflects the continuing patriarchy, that it's a male-led, male-run society, perhaps too much so for the benefit of men?
I was going to say something there, but actually, I've got 2 points to say on that. One is yes, but it's naive to think, not even naive, it's just wrong that to assume, for example, that looking after children does not benefit men, that doing things around the house does not benefit men. And actually, this whole patriarchy, which we're not here to talk about, but it damages everybody, and everybody's missing out on something. So where women might be missing out on opportunities if they're mothers and they have a male partner, might be missing out on opportunities regarding their career, their male partner, the male parent may be missing out on opportunities around the family, and all of the great joy and, you know, fulfillment you get from having a family as well.
I think it's a very strong point. Last week, I as part of Entrecomp, I interviewed a brilliant female entrepreneur, Maxine Laceby, and pretty much the first word on her LinkedIn profile is mother. That she, for all her great undoubted business success, she self-defines as mother as the first thing. And I asked her why so. She told me why, but we were just reflecting that men don't first describe themselves as fathers, which very much plays to your point, Renee, about the importance and richness of that experience. We've had our good friend, anonymous attendee, who's a regular attendee of these events. She or he, sorry, that was unintended, I do not know. Following on to Jane's point, isn't the main issue childcare? Yes, which is a fundamental problem and generally falls to women. Do businesses need to support women more with childcare? Other than perhaps yes, because I suspect there may well be yes. What might businesses do?
Yeah, I mean, it's more. I mean, I guess childcare is one thing. It's more. For me, it's more the gap of women who go out of work and then come back in. So it's how do you fulfill that gap? I think certainly organisations need to be more family friendly. You know, when you get to boards, quite often you find the macho hours, the approach to things, the way they've always worked. You know, seeing you know, doing 9 to 5 is not seen as helping your career. So all those things, actually having to drop out to go and pick up kids from school, all that sort of stuff impacts, I guess, people's ability to demonstrate, sometimes to prove their worth. So I think that's part of the challenge, is how organisations see that. So I think childcare. I mean, I don't have children, so you know, that may be because I decided to focus on my career. So I don't have kids, but actually, you know, we've got to find a way of making it more equal in the workplace.
I just want to pick up the technology-related working from home points for some organisations and businesses. Clearly not anything like all. Are you in a broader sense optimistic that might lead perhaps already has led to a greater flexibility of how people use their time, particularly women using their time in work, such that there may be greater opportunity because technology means you can work from anywhere, you have greater control over your time, you don't have commute time or whatever. Will technology help in this area, or is that just pie in the sky?
I'm going to answer that as a mother with a child in the house right now. Yes and no. So it gives you a lot more flexibility. So, for example, I can just say, you know, I've got to go and get my daughter, and you know you're going to be back, or I can even like take a meeting in the car or on the street, which I have done. But fundamentally, I would say, should I be having to do that? So it enables me to keep up with my career because I'm very career oriented. So I can say, okay, I've got to drop my daughter off at school, but I will do that meeting at 8:30. It's because I will lob her in the gate and then I'll like join on my phone. So it's possible, but it's not ideal. And I think that it really calls for more of a thinking about how we manage work and our lives. And again, that's the type of thing, you know, that can benefit everyone. I've got colleagues who join meetings from the gym or whatever. So it does give them, you know, it gives everybody that extra flexibility. But if fundamentally we don't have time for our lives, we're probably working too much.
Yeah, which would take us into another area about that.
Could I add,
sorry,
Greg,
yeah,
could I add there that I've actually seen as a charity trustee where it's generally like outside of work time, I do it outside of my full-time employment, that is actually really, we noticed throughout the pandemic, it's actually really helpful for people with kids that they were able to join trustee meetings where they wouldn't necessarily be able to find childcare, find whatever, to get down to the studios and get into a trustee meeting in person, but to join online. Now we amazingly have the ability to do it hybrid, so more people with children with other responsibilities are able to be part of the board and have their voice heard, which for us as a charity is invaluable, really.
Yeah, sorry, Greg, I was going to say, building on Renee's point a little bit, I mean, I do think there's a work-life balance issue as well on this stuff, because I think whilst technology is great, you know, if you do have children at home and you end up working in the evenings to try and cover that up because it's expected that you make up the hours, then you're in all sorts of challenges in terms of quality of life. So I think it's a pro and a con. I think, you know, Abby's absolutely right about it enables and facilitates, but I think we need to make sure that it's not being too much is being asked of people because of that. Yeah,
I'd like to return to that, and specifically in the arts and charity sector, but it applies across the piece. Abby, to you on this point, one might imagine, and this may be you know, a little bit delusional, we might imagine that the arts world that you're in might typically be a little bit more liberal, a little bit more enlightened than some more traditional business sectors. Do you think that's true again, or is it pie in the sky stuff?
Yes, I would say so. I definitely can't make any sweeping statements. In my experience, yes. But there still are areas in which there needs to be more work, kind of similar to what we've already been discussing. But in my experience as a young trustee, I think we touched earlier on being the lone voice, and yeah, I definitely feel that. Luckily, I did have one other person under 30 when I first became a trustee, but yeah, since then it's been, yeah, definitely a little bit lacking, I guess, in terms of diversity on the board.
Yeah, well, traipsing very carefully around the issue of age, because we've all got to be careful about such matters. I mean, you're evidently younger than many board members, at least in my experience. Do you think age has been a barrier, or is possibly a virtue for you in this context?
I'd quite like to think it was a virtue. in terms of contributing to a board, and I think it's a win-win for both parties. It's definitely good for a board in terms of having a unique insight into, because I think it's something like 3% of trustees are under 30, and actually when there's a significant amount of charities that are focused on young people and supporting them and trying to engage more young people, you need that insight to be strategic, and yeah, insight into those audiences is vital. And I hope that my insight into particularly the community aspects of the charity that I'm a trustee for, I hope that my age is helping them in terms of getting different insights.
I'd like to explore this this time point for you each in the context of arts, charities, community interest companies, enabling groups, and so on. That, you know, boards and trustees perhaps tend to be the maybe particularly in arts, but tend to be the old guard, who you know, the honorific, but also they have the time which others don't. How far do you see that as a barrier to that plurality, which is desirable?
I was going to say, if I can jump in, so there's been some interesting research, not so much around, more on board tenure now, and actually about exactly your point that, you know, depending on who you're talking about with non-executives, there are certain rules now around how long non-executives can serve on FTSE 100 companies, but actually across organizations, there's not really many rules about executives and how long they serve. And you can quite often find in organizations that people will move roles, but they'll stay on the board. So the tenure can be quite long. They can be friends with people for a long time. And of course, you know, that starts to perpetuate in terms of, you know, who they hire and how things are appointed, even in terms of compensation. So I think it's interesting how it's now seen as board tenure is also seen as a challenge to organizations. It's not just about gender split or diversity split. It's also about, well, how long do they stay on the board? Of course, tenure is a good thing because you have experience, but then you're missing out on a whole lot of other stuff about bringing innovation in and creativity. So you've got to balance that, and it is starting to be seen as a real disadvantage for organizations that have long tenure. They're more they take potentially more risks because they think they know what they're doing. They think they know each other, whereas actually if you've got a more creative, different, diverse board, then, you know, maybe you start to have people challenging groupthink. So I think the tenure thing is a really interesting one, and of course it's going against, you know, it's really hard to change that because it's really inculcated into the structure of most organizations. So it's quite hard to move people on, even though they're there for very good reasons, I'm sure. You know, it's quite interesting how much impact that has on the health of the board going forward.
And always around the diversity, not and we'll come on to the whole concept of this being a tick box virtue signaling type of area, which clearly some people still maintain, but really in terms of fresh thinking, sometimes a generational impact, sometimes technology related, but sometimes empathy or reach out or an understanding of different types of communities, that arts, charities and CICs should lead the way, because tenure can be enshrined in articles of association in a way that, aside from FTSE companies, where there is, as you say, Jane, a need to disclose, most companies don't disclose their boards of their senior management teams. There's no public environment in which to do that. That's an observation rather than a question. I'd like to come to you, Jane, about the university, making a similar point about arts, perhaps, that in your experience of someone with a stellar career in corporate life coming into the university world, I suspect you're slightly conflicted here, but anyway, I'm going to ask you, do you think the university is inherently sort of ahead of some businesses in its thinking in this area?
Oh, you got me. It's a tricky one now, isn't it? I mean, I have to say, if I look at the number of professors who are female, there's less female professors than there are male professors. So I'm not sure I could even answer that yet. I think it's very different. I think you'll find that there's much more collegiate approaches. It seems like a much flatter structure. So you don't tend to get, I mean, obviously when you get to board levels, and I'm not at that sort of level within the university, but it feels flatter. Although I can see there are definitely there definitely are less women than men, certainly in my field, but then there are outside in business. So it doesn't surprise me, but it feels like a flatter structure. It certainly doesn't feel patriarchal. It doesn't feel discriminatory in any way. But then there are less professors who are female, so I had then look at that and think, well, not sure.
And tenure is an entirely different concept, I guess, in
absolutely.
universities. That is something into which we're not going to go today. Some of the time, maybe. Renee, talk us through this. And I know you spoke in this area at a Bath Life Business Club, where you talked about what practical steps companies might take, perhaps first to be aware, but to really change. What might companies do differently?
That's a good question. So I think there's really 3 things. I'm going to say 3, even though I haven't counted them before I started to list them out. So the first thing is really look at who you currently have. So if you're thinking about your board or your senior team, look at who you already have there. And to really do that looking, you may have to have some demographic information, so you know who they, you know what their attributes are that could be related to diversity, and then look at who you want your customers or your service users to be. So not who they are, but who you want them to be. And then you know what the gap is that you need to fill. So you know who you should be trying to get, whose ideas, whose thoughts and whose input you should be trying to get into your organization to help you make those changes. So it could be, could you recruit some different people onto your board immediately? But it could be, how can I get those ideas into the room in another way if there's nobody available, which I'm sure we will discuss, but if there really is nobody available, how can I get those ideas into the room in a different way? And it's really taking that kind of holistic approach of inside and outside, and where's the gap? That's what I would say.
Thanks. I'll call out to any of the Bath businesses watching us, please, and if you wish it to be anonymous, please do ask questions. I think there's you've touched on 2 areas which we'll come on to shortly. One is about recruitment approach, as well as recruitment approach, but the other is into the area of potential unconscious or apparent unconscious bias. Given that, I'd like to broaden the discussion at this point to other areas of diversity. So whilst this is rooted in a discussion around gender and the barriers and missed opportunities, but much the same thinking around ethnicity, age, at both young and older levels, physical ability, perhaps sexuality, even education, given that we're here with the university. So in any area of diversity, how do you each respond to the critique that this is, this is all virtual signaling? And of course, employers will take on and promote the best talent, and that many fervently believe that they have no biases. It's all twaddle, isn't it? I'm trying hard to make the point.
Well, the last time I heard the word twaddle used was when my mother used it, so it's quite I think it's interesting you mentioned talent programs, because I think talent programs in a lot of organizations are still shrouded in mystery, and generally there's a few people who are high potential and you help them forward, but in reality I've always seen that as almost the place where the challenge starts, because you're focusing on just a few people that you've decided should be elevated to the senior ranks, and quite often that's where diversity goes wrong. I guess it's also in terms of trying to get the organization to represent the community you serve, it doesn't really take account of that quite often. It just takes account of the people you have in your pool, and then you look at how you help them with their careers going forward. So whilst succession planning can help you in trying to adjust the formation of that board, the talent management policies are so sort of hidden quite often, because they can't tell everybody. So I remember when I was working in my large American institution, financial services, you didn't know from year to year whether you were on the talent program or not. You just sometimes got tapped on the shoulder to say you can go on this very exciting development program, or you never got a call. So you never knew if you were on the talent program. It wasn't something that you were allowed to know, because obviously the vast majority of people weren't invested in and just carried on doing their jobs as normal. So quite a really divisive approach to things, which I think I don't think it was unusual in that organisation. I think it's across lots of big organisations do that. It's not something that's openly discussed. So it's another way of introducing bias into an organisation. So sorry, I've just gone on this tangent, but that was me getting on my soapbox about talent management.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. When it comes to bias, I want to come to this point, which is about overt or at least overtly expressed anti-diversity is relatively rare. But is there any effective difference between bias and unconscious bias that either ends up in discrimination? Does it matter? René, I want to bring you on this point. We chatted the other day about this, that you know, we can each think there isn't any form of bias, but you, I think, would maintain that there is, but ultimately it ends in discrimination anyway.
Yeah, I think either way it ends in discrimination. I think the reason that unconscious bias is a problem is because you don't. So we've got some great examples of people being very awful in public recently. At least we know what we're dealing with that person, right? So you know what you're going to get. You know to avoid, you know to whatever you got to do to kind of protect yourself in that situation. But if it's unconscious bias and the person is not aware of it, or they're not actively out there doing awful things, you know, like that, you can go into a situation and assume that you're going to be treated fairly and then not be. And that's the difficulty. And also, if you're not aware of your biases, you can't do anything to fix them. So, you know, we all have unconscious areas of unconscious bias. It's the way our society is built. We're programmed to have them. But it's about finding out what they are and then doing something about them. And so they can be much more insidious. And if you're not aware, if you are responsible for making policies or procedures, you might be building them into that. It really can become, you know, everywhere quite easily.
But just on that point, we all tell stories to ourselves, not literally, one hopes, but we all have a belief in value system or our own efficacy or whatever it might be. How would you advise people to seek to recognize unconscious bias, given precisely that some would think it is unconscious? So how do you self-diagnose?
That's a really good question. There's it's difficult, and it's something you have to do all the time. Like, it's a way of living your life, but really it's challenging your assumptions. So it might, for example, be easy to assume that I at my job can't attend an evening event because I've got to look after my child, and you wouldn't even ask me, but then you wouldn't invite me. And that's a, you know what I mean, that is an example of someone's unconscious bias, their assumption that as a person with a child, I'm going to be busy and not able to attend, that impacts my experiences. So the first thing is really any assumption that you're making about anybody at all, just challenge it, and you know, really try and face that head on, and that's how you can do that in your real life.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of training online. Actually, you can do little training courses and stuff online. So, you know, I know when I was working most recently, you know, we had actors coming in and doing sessions around bias and pushing out unconscious biases, and you know, then you've got the things like microaggressions coming through now. So there's an awful lot of stuff where, you know, like René says, it's about really truly understanding yourself and examining, you know, what biases you have, because everybody has biases. It's not no one is, every single person has biases. No, we don't have anyone who doesn't, even if people say they don't. They clearly have stuff in the background that is biased. So it's trying to recognize those and trying to accommodate them and make sure that you try and think as broadly as possible.
There's a fair old spread from interest, knowledge, preference, bias, discrimination, and somewhere on that point, all of us are at all times. Jane, if I could ask you a personal question then, if you did one of those courses or attended one of those events, do you want to share anything you discovered about yourself, or do you want to anonymize it? Perhaps a colleague you were with and they realised X.
It's probably more general with me. I mean, because I've worked across many different. There's probably certain countries where if someone's from a certain country, I know immediately I'll be thinking something different about them because of the way they've worked or because of the colleagues I've worked with across different countries. So I know that I have to be really international in my outlook and try and make sure that I'm not thinking someone's always punctual because they're that particular nationality, or they're lazy because of, so I think I probably, because I've worked in so many countries, I think that's where some of my biases come from, which means I have to make sure that I'm really open and overt about it, and examine what I'm really thinking when I meet people. I don't know if that sounds, I don't want to be specific, but that's how I've recognized my own issues.
And I just to say as a response, I don't at all wish to give you a hard time. It's not that frame like that. It's more about how one understands oneself in different settings. So slightly broaden it, perhaps for you each, what specific barriers to diversity have you encountered, or perhaps your colleagues have encountered?
For me, certainly I've had lots of women who work for me who have got children, for example, and when they go off on maternity leave, they've then been not counted for promotion when they return. So that's been a really clear one for me. I certainly, from an age point of view, young, not necessarily just young women, but young men and women who have huge capability, having to really prove themselves in order to get ahead, even though they've got the massive capability. So just, even trying to get promotions has been hard compared to someone who's got 10 years experience or only 2. So I think, they've been really strong. And the only thing I was thinking with, you talked about fresh thinking. One of the things I did in a previous organization was I created a challenger board. So I created a new board of, yes, albeit younger, people, different nationalities, different ethnicities, different genders, and I created a challenger board to my board, and paired them up with the board members, and that kind of helped. I guess there was a reverse mentoring aspect in it, but that kind of helped the board members start to see a different perspective, but also bring new ideas to the board. So it was a really interesting year-long experiment, and it worked really well. Not without challenge from the board members themselves, who weren't keen when I initially suggested it, but in the end they became friends and created a great deal of excitement within the organisation.
You can say there's something of a parallel in some schools where they have I was going to say school kids, but that's probably not quite the terminology, but students, representative organisations to have a voice in order to be able to, rather than a very top-down culture, which most schools were until reasonably recent times. We've had a whole flock or a flurry, or whatever the technical term is, of questions. If I could just throw a few out at you each. Do you think giving men more paternity leave could help negate the disadvantage to women taking time out of work to have children?
Yes.
Yeah, well, okay. I was waiting for one of you to say it. I mean, all right. Frame it slightly differently. How material a benefit might that be? I
think it would be really great. I think one thing we talk a lot about equality, and we are right now, but it's it's like almost like the elephant in the room. I think that fathers get 2 weeks as standard, and that's just ridiculous. It's not sufficient. I can't imagine that a lot of men would feel that that's sufficient for them to spend the time with their child after they've had a new arrival in their family. And there are lots of countries that do a much better job of that. So I really think it would have a huge impact. I'm really fortunate that my husband and I, we took shared leave. So we took the same amount of time, which really meant that I was able to get on with my job a bit, focus on some work stuff, and also that he got to spend really good quality time with our daughter as well. So yeah.
Well, that seems quite strongly on the wish list, and as you say, other countries, it's a bit of a cliche, but particularly Scandinavian countries have a much more enlightened and integrated approach.
Sorry, Greg, the only thing I'd say about that is that which I completely agree with Renee, but some of the really disturbing stuff that comes out of organisations that have allowed dual paternity leave, maternity leave, have been the discrimination against the men who've taken it, against the other people in the organisation, thinking that they're not really up for the job or something, and therefore they get then discounted in their careers. So it's really interesting, because I've heard there's quite a lot of evidence around men having to be quite brave about doing this in organizations because it's still so unusual. So yes, absolutely, I think we should do it, but I think we should recognize that it's still quite difficult for men to actually ask for equality in that, even if they want to, because they'll be discriminated at, or they feel as though they're not going to be quite seen as career orientated themselves then. So it kind of pushes back into the world we face continually, but it's really interesting.
Yeah, that somehow work isn't sufficiently important if they're wanting to take X amount of time off or see benefit of it.
Absolutely.
I think it's a very strong point. In your experience, and perhaps Abby on this one as well, are business leaders fearful, or any organisation, fearful of mishandling diversity, i.e. they're accused unfairly of being tokenist? And how do we help them navigate these situations? Do you have any sense of that there's an inhibition or sort of a caution to actually address it because they fear getting it wrong?
I would say there's definitely a bit of a burying your head in the sand, and almost like for some organizations, maybe just like, well, we're doing okay, or, you know, you have X amount of people, or I don't know whether any of Jane or Renee can add to this, but yes, I think there's definitely like a bit of a fear of maybe saying the wrong thing, or putting your head above the parapet a bit, and potentially not wanting to say the wrong thing, I guess.
Well, maybe it's even a very useful shield for some people, saying, "Oh, I'm bound to get it wrong, so therefore I don't need to do it. I daren't do anything," and it's an excuse to inertia, potentially. Who knows? Who knows? Indeed. Joanna Aspin has asked, challenging unconscious bias is a great thing to do, but how can we get those that don't think there is a problem to do it? And I want to bring in, I want to reference to that exact question from Joanna. On one of my business surgeries last year, we had a particular man, you'll be unsurprised to hear, a particular old school man, I suspect probably Victorian old school man. His contention was that the single biggest barrier to women's progress in business, wait for this one, was women. That in his experience, he had offered positions and women either didn't have the self-belief or didn't have the social infrastructure, family infrastructure, whatever, to progress. And so he said, well, there you are, you see, women, they don't want to progress. You think, so I'm hesitating as I'm saying it, but to that narrative, as asked by Joanna, if people don't think there's a problem, how do you address that?
I guess there's a couple, for me, I guess there's a couple of things. I mean, you know, basically you still have a selection process designed by men, and adverts is mostly designed by men. Even if women write them, they're sanctioned by men. So, you know, we still, I don't think we've actually, I mean, there is some truth in the thing that if you, and I've done it with loads of audiences, if you ask, if you show people a job advert and they're 90% qualified to do that job, would they apply for it? Everyone puts their hands up, but the lower the percentage of qualification that you are, so if you get to like 50%, the less women put their hands up, the less women are willing to say, I'm not going to chance it. Whereas, and I'm generalizing, quite often men will put their hands up, and I've done it on loads of audiences. But I think you know, that might just mean that women are more risk averse and more careful. That doesn't mean that they're not good enough for the job. You know, so I think some real challenges around that, because, you know, I don't think we self-select, but I think if jobs are not attractive to us, and if it's, you know, I genuinely think that's part of the challenge we have in even the job descriptions we do. Even the job descriptions themselves can be biased, and so just by the wording, you can just feel as though it's not going to be for you. So I think it really annoys me when people say about being self-selected. But the only other thing I'd say about unconscious bias, and Joanna's point, is, you know, you have to get people to start calling things out in organizations, and it's really hard to do that. I've done it myself. I've encouraged employees to do that. You know, when you're faced with unconscious bias, you have to put your hand up and say, I'm not accepting that. I won't tolerate it. And hopefully organizations get better at handling those situations, and then, you know, training the individuals who still display unacceptable approaches. So it is really difficult to do, but you rely on people to out them. and say, this happened to me, almost the Me Too movement. It's got to get people, people got to be brave enough to actually raise their hands and say, I'm not tolerating it, I can't do that. And as I say, I've been through that a few times in my career where I've actually had to put my hand up and say, I'm not going to accept that approach. That's not going to be something I can work with. So I think we just have to encourage, unfortunately, people who have these prejudices against them, we have to get them to raise their hands and shout.
And then likewise, as we've seen in recent times, call people out nationally or publicly when it may be one of the, I can't remember, Queen's equerries or whatever the role was, or a bafflingly esteemed TV presenter, in both cases saying pretty reprehensible things, but quite rightly called out for that. But as with national, so with local, so with individual companies. If you experience it, say it. I want to come on to another aspect, a key aspect of diversity, and it's about ethnicity. Bath is self-evidently a very white city. It's 94.6% white, which is well above the national average. Talk to us about some of the challenges that context of Bath places on ethnic minorities seeking jobs and also on companies employing them.
So it's really, Bath is very unique and strange. But I think that it's difficult for organisations, if you're looking to, so say we're talking about if you're hiring for a board and you were looking for a person from a minority ethnicity in the UK to be on your board, you may well experience the thing of going, there aren't very many people that meet the criteria that I need for my board. And then you have to think about different ways to address that. If you're employing your kind of standard level of employee, then really that should have no impact on you. And then but for your employees, if your employees are from any minority, so if they're an ethnic minority or gender or sexuality or a disability, they're going to be experiencing kind of maybe feeling they might feel isolated. They might be really conscious that they're the only person of that ethnicity where they work, and so that's going to be an extra challenge and a hurdle for them, just even like in coming to work every day, maybe, that they have to face. And if anything does happen, if they do experience any discrimination or any problems, they're going to feel extra self-conscious about raising it. So I think it's really important that organisations do, particularly in Bath, because it's so much of a minority, you really need to be thinking about how you're treating your employees and making sure that they are treated equally within your organisation, because it's a bigger problem because there are less people, not a smaller problem.
Lurking in there, of course, is the need for a yet deeper empathy that anyone in a senior position needs to have for their team, to see the world as far as possible, through their eyes, and have that sense of, as you say, if you are, just one person from whichever form of ethnicity or whichever area, that the world looks very different to you in a very, in this case, as discussed, a very white city. Abby or Jane, any points about ethnicity specifically, and then I want to come on to education.
Yeah, just quickly, I would say it's the sort of in-out group stuff. So that's about diversity, where, as Renee says, if you're going to be in a total minority, then it's even trying to work out how you can attract more people, and also how you can make people feel comfortable where they are. So I think that's, when you look at diversity, being part of the in-group, when you're in the in-group, it feels fantastic and you feel part of the group and you feel like you're safety in numbers. But if you're in the out group, I think it can really affect your confidence anyway. So you sort of almost double whammy of you're already an ethnic minority, and actually then you feel worse because you're on your own and you have no one really to work with. So I do think that's a really challenging issue actually that we have to face, especially within Bath.
I think this can happen a lot in charities as well. I think particularly as recruitment isn't necessarily as structured, and I think it happens quite a lot that you find your friends, and it's, in some cases it can be internal trustees or people that you know, or this person knows this person, and I found in some cases charities don't even advertise for trustees. And how can you expect to build a more diverse board if you're not even telling people that you're looking for trustees? And you know, there's many ways to find and engage different types of people, and there are people there, but if you're not telling anybody, how is anybody going to know unless you are already maybe part of that in-group?
If you're not part of the in-crowd, the barriers to getting into it are perhaps as high, or certainly they are too high by comparison. We are coming towards the end, but I want to come on to this education point. And it is framed in the context of the University of Bath, but more generally about recruitment. Back in the day, something like 7% went to university. Currently, it's now in the high 30s, low 40s%. Still a minority of this younger age group, and even more clearly a minority across the workforce. But Jane, is there a bias towards the educated?
Yeah, undoubtedly there is. You know, you clearly looking at someone who's got vocational as opposed to academic approach. So you know, I think that's a real challenge. Is, you know, how do you help people who maybe don't have the formal education that is expected, but have the talent anyway. So I think it's, and also just helping them. Yeah, helping them actually think about how they can apply and how they don't discount themselves because they have the qualities available. So yeah, absolutely, it's actually almost an overt barrier. Because even if you look at the job descriptions, you know, you'll see that it's in there as a, you know, must have a first degree or whatever. You know, that actually discounts a huge amount of people that probably could make a massive impact in the organisation. You know, that don't have degrees but have had nonetheless very good experiences in their own organizations. And even if, especially if they're self-employed or, you know, whatever, they've run their own business, then want to go into sort of corporate mainstream, it's a real challenge.
But then the overt barrier, but what about the practicality that for many roles, and I am thinking particularly of Bath, which has a preponderance of these, there are many roles in pro services and the broader knowledge economy. A degree is a very easy proxy for brightness. There's a read across, which is, you know, simplistic, but it's a read across. It's certainly a very convenient way to filter dozens of CVs. You know, any job you get dozens in. But is that fair? Because clearly many highly successful people left education at 18, even 16. How, as a business owner, do you reach out, get engagement with, understand people's narratives if you haven't got that sort of kite mark of a degree which filters so many applicants? Renee, you look as though you want to come in on this point.
Sorry, that's just laziness. No, so I don't have a degree and I didn't go to university. And I remember when I applied for one of my first jobs, like in a corporate job, the sole in the interview was me justifying why I didn't have a degree, and that was it. I got the job. But anyway, I think that it is laziness, and you need to think about, if you're writing a job ad, what you want the person to have or demonstrate. What does having a degree give you over not having a degree? What do you expect them to be able to do now that they have a degree? What do you expect? How do you expect them to perform at their job? And put that into the job advert, because that's what you're looking for. Plenty of people sail through university without trying very hard, get a degree, and are they going to be more qualified than somebody who's worked really hard outside of university, maybe had a job for a number of years? You know, those are the types of things that you need to be thinking about when you're writing the job ads.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I say certainly, then maybe that's another unconscious bias. One would imagine that it is slightly easier when it comes to promotion, because at least you can see people in situ and how they develop, what potential. But the recruitment is a bigger barrier. Beyond not putting too high a hurdle, such as you have to have the first degree, or framing the language which strongly implies that. What else might employers do when it comes to recruitment beyond more detailedly assessing a CV about prior work experience, life experiences, and so on? Any practical tips from any of you, each of you?
You could hold open days or something. I mean, you don't necessarily make it a CV point of view. Make it something more, I guess, more able for people to turn up. Have an event where people can turn up and you get to meet people that way. It's much better than having a CV anyway. And you might find all sorts of people that you would never get through a job advert. So try something a bit different.
And we are sort of through time, but I do want to chuck in a couple others, if I may. Which is, I want to come back to agenda points. There was a time when women who wished to succeed in business felt they had to act and perhaps even dress more like men, especially in corporate life. And I wondered, particularly Jane, but each of you, do you think that's still true that women believe, some women believe they have to ape men, it's a very odd image, aping men, in order to get on?
Well, I mean, I think that's probably, because when I was in my 20s and 30s and starting to be a board member, I wore trouser suits and shirts, and so clearly was trying to, I don't think I was trying to ape men, I don't remember doing that, but I certainly felt as though I wouldn't be taken seriously. But that's partly why I set up First Impressions, also was to enable women to feel more confident. Certainly the research says that women in particular are more affected by their own appearance, and the confidence is affected. And so, by putting First Impressions together, we're hoping that can help women break those barriers so that they can turn up to interview feeling really confident and hopefully do really well. So I suppose I should say I don't really believe it should be an issue, but it clearly is. And so trying to help women feel as good as they can, even if they can't afford the interview clothes themselves, giving them some support there, I think is really valuable. I'm sure Renee and Abby have probably alternative views, because I'm sure that I don't know, Abby, how you have to dress for work, but hopefully it isn't trouser suits and shirts unless you really want to wear those.
Yeah, it's quite the opposite actually. In terms of, I don't know, because I work in the arts, whether it's a bit, as we said, maybe a little bit more liberal, but I think there's still a sense there though of maybe dressing up in terms of building confidence and feeling like you're part of the I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but yeah, basically what Jane has just said in terms of
you have to don the uniform, I guess, in some cases. It's not that long ago that PwC quite rightly lost a court case brought by some of their team who were told they had, women were told they had to wear heels. Really? I mean, that's 7-8 years ago, not long back. Just on that, and I just want, we are going to close in a sec, but on this attitudinal point, that some women choose or believe they have to present themselves as tougher, more competitive, because some men apparently value that. Frankly, the Apprentice as a TV show is a toxic petri dish, sort of fermenting that. Do you think that is changing, or is that still there, that women have to act like men to succeed in business? Some women.
I would say, what do you even mean by that? Some women are tougher and more competitive, and some women are not. Just like some men are tougher and more competitive, and some men are not. But I would say that there's maybe a perception of what a successful business person looks like, very serious. And maybe people feel the need to play up to that, both men and women. I hope that we are getting to a time where we accept the different attributes that people have that they bring to the workplace, and all of those kind of add value when they're together, and actually having all different personality types in a room, in a boardroom, gets really good results, rather than 12 people who would apply for The Apprentice.
The alpha males, it's somewhere between role-playing, cosplay, almost, as though you have to physically dress out. Right, last question, we're through 5:12. So yes, either touch on something that you think we haven't discussed sufficiently, or something new. If you are Prime Minister, you mentioned earlier about how important representation it is, of course, you're Prime Minister for a day. you can enact one single change in the area of diversity, what would you do?
I'll go first.
Please.
I think in terms of being a charity trustee, I would help employers view being on a board as a professional development, and maybe give employers more time, maybe, you know, in the workday or an hour at the end of the workday to go to a board meeting, do some voluntary work, which I think some employers do, but specifically being on a board and the benefits that that can bring their employees, but also the benefits for charities.
Essentially the inward and outward benefit both to the organisation but also to the individual of experiencing and contributing. Yeah, good point. Jane or Renee, any change? You know, you can make one thing happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's got to be something around the paternity, maternity approach, so that, you know, there is equality there, and it's not seen as a bad thing. But I mean, other than being able to, if I could change the government overnight and make it all female, that would be fine. That would be a good way of starting. But I don't expect I could do that in a day.
Good luck with it either way around. I'm going to be strictly neutral about that observation. Renee, you've got the joy of being the third, which in some ways is the most difficult one. So you're on the last leg of this one. I'm
on the last leg. Well, actually, I was really torn to say something super controversial. My initial response is give people money. However, that would solve a lot of problems, not just diversity. But for the constraints of this talk, I would probably give organizations somehow, and I don't know how, toolkits to be able to actually make, to be able to have the knowledge and the power to make changes. And that's going to be, that probably wouldn't take a day, I imagine. It may be a very busy day. If I got everybody focused on it, it might be possible to make a toolkit and deliver it. But I think that it's a lot of it is around the tools, the resources, the knowledge and the understanding that is maybe lacking within organisations to be able to implement these changes.
So maybe if you have spare time, you can come and help me afterwards, Renee.
Exactly.
So I think in summary, pretty much what you've each defined there is empowerment through knowledge, awareness, the change that happens, empowerment through experience of contributing to and benefiting from, but also the benefits and the change through diversity of a different structure of governance, whether it's the government or indeed organisations, as Jane has been talking about. We're through our time. I would like to thank each of our Bath Life Business Club surgery speakers today, Jane Ellis-Brush, Abby Milliken and Renee Jacobs, and of course the University of Bath School of Management. Thank you to each. And thank you to everyone for your time and questions. I wasn't able to take 2 or 3 of them, actually. Apologies for that. And look out for this on the YouTube channel, which is a bit weird if you're watching the YouTube channel, because you know it's there, but there you go. Thank you for your support for Bath Life during this year. Please do remember that next business surgery, 12th of Jan at 2 p.m, sustainability, ethics and idealism, and why that matters and is mattering more. Please enjoy your break whenever it comes and however long it is. This has been a Media Clash production, and this has been the latest and last of this year, Bath Life Business Surgery. Thank you. Bath together, always. Thanks.